So the reason everything is called underscore low is that this is essentially going to be my low poly. I do have some more cleanup I can do. There are some edges here that are not contributing to the shape of the model, which don't really need to be there. But for the most part, this is my low. It's actually kind of somewhere in the middle. It's kind of a mid poly. Now, the reason we're using underscore low is that when we do our texture painting, we're going to be doing it inside of Substance Painter. And the reason we want to use, Substance Painter is kind of a standard in painting models, and so what we want to do is we want to adhere to Substance Painter's naming convention. So if I bring this over here, this is Substance Painter's naming convention, and the way that this works is that when you bake in Substance Painter, they've got a really good example here with this head and the helmet that it's wearing. So you can see that when you bake, there's the geometry, and when you bake without name matching, the helmet gets baked onto the face, which isn't exactly what you want. And so Painter has the ability of saying only match by mesh name. So when you do that, only things with matching names will see each other when you do your baking. So its default, what Substance Painter uses by default for its naming convention, is underscore high for the high poly, underscore low for the low poly, and underscore ignore BF, which is ignore back facing, so it won't see the inside of your model. And so I, just out of habit, will never do that. I will never, I just use Substance Painter's naming convention. I never stray away from it. And that way my naming convention is always right. Whenever I go to bake everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be, which just makes my life a little bit simpler. And so that's why I do that. So all these names underscore low are going to be for the low poly, which this will become. And then we're going to make copies. It's not just for normal maps, it's for the baking. We're actually going to bake 7 maps when we go into Painter. And they're all equally important. Yeah, exactly. Just pick one low or high, depending on what you're doing. So let me show you what we're going to do here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've got a layer called low poly, which right now is empty. So we're going to grab everything, and I'm going to say add selected objects. So that's now in the low poly layer, which is good. I'm going to also take them all, and I'm going to hit Control D. That's going to make a new high poly one. So I'm going to create a new layer. I will rename said layer high poly. And I will add selected to the high poly layer. So now what's visible is high poly. So the first thing I got to do is change my names to high. Now it is case sensitive. So remember that when you name things, it doesn't matter what the mesh name is, but the underscore high and underscore low are case sensitive. So if you use a capital H or a capital L, they will not bake properly. Substance Painter needs that proper underscore lowercase. Okay, so now the only thing visible in the high poly is the high poly versions of these meshes. So what I need to do is actually make the high poly version of these meshes. Now, when you do high poly, there is a certain list of things that need to be high poly and a list of things that don't need to be there when you do your high poly. And I'll show you kind of the example between them here, or the difference between them, is that we are... I'm looking for my reference here. Sorry, there we are. So here's my reference. This is the little scope guy that I made that I was looking at. So when I look at this thing, I want to pay attention to silhouette. So silhouette is what's going to determine if I actually need something high poly there or if I don't. So when I look at this guy, and more importantly, this one, when I go and look at this, these buttons have a plus and a minus on them. Now, I'm not going to go and add that plus and minus. That's going to be a normal map. Now, to create a normal map, I might need it in the high poly, but I think it's actually going to be easier if I stamp that in Painter. So because this is not changing the silhouette, I'm okay with it not being there in the high poly. However, you can see that this thing sticks out, right? That there are bumps on things. Well, those are there in silhouette, so they are things that I'm going to need to add. So first things first, let's start. So basically, it's less important to have the high poly when we're doing this sort of medium poly work, since we have modeled all the fiddly bits already. Exactly. So if I take this mesh now, this is going to be my high poly. I'm going to isolate it, and I'm going to start cleaning it up in order to make it high poly. Now, some of the things, the rules with high poly modeling are different than they are with low poly modeling. For instance, this polygon is an n-gon. An n-gon is disastrous in low poly. But in high poly, it don't matter. In high poly, that's fine. It'll subdivide absolutely beautifully. And so I can leave it. What I want to do is I want to concentrate on the edges that are going to support this thing. So if I hit 3 on my keyboard, it's going to show me what the mesh is going to look like as high poly. And you can see that for most part, it's holding up okay. There's a few places where it's getting a little wibbly wobbly. I'm kind of losing the little circles here. They're kind of becoming a little wonky. You can see that the inset here, it lost all the box shape that's there. It kind of just disappeared. But for everything else, it's kind of holding its shape. Even this guy got a little wonky. So I'm going to hit 1 on my keyboard, and that's going to return me, if I select this guy, back to the high poly view of this thing. So the idea now is going to be to tell the software when you want something to remain rigid and when you don't. Rigidity is going to be created by adding additional edges that support the shape of the high poly. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to start with this edge here that goes around this little bevel that I've created. I'm going to go 3 on my keyboard, and you can see that that edge is getting all wonky and it's getting smoothed out. Now, you have 2 options that you can do. The first is going to be to create a bevel on that edge. And when you bevel it, you can see that you can get it to hold its shape a little bit more. In fact, if I add another segment, it should hold up. Oh, there we go. It should hold up even more. And so that looks much better. If I go out of here and go there, I can see that I'm now getting what looks like a nice soft transition between those areas. Okay, so that's one of the options that we can do. Grab all the edges that need to be split, go to bevel, and give them a little bit of a shape change, and go back here, and you can see that that now looks like molded plastic. Exactly kind of what I was going for. Not too bad. That's kind of what I want to do. I want to go through and grab some edges here. If I go to 1, I can see that this edge here needs to be supported all the way around. It's what's really keeping this shape square. And so I'll bevel it to there. Again, I'm going to hit 3 on my keyboard to go to my high poly. I'm going to go to bevel, and I'll give it another segment like so. And that's now starting to hold the shape a little bit better. I'll go inside here. And these guys too could use a bevel. I might as well do both of these together since they are identical shapes. So we'll add a bevel, add a segment. We'll go just to 2. I'll bring that down. That looks better. And then I'll do these 2 guys. Again, bevel. Set my segments to 2. Bring the inset down a little bit, and you can see it's giving me a really nice clean shape now. So if I go out of here, that's starting to give me the impression of being molded plastic. Now, in almost everything else on this, it looks okay. I can see that I'm getting a little bit of a weird pinch here, but I think on everything else that looks okay. I don't think I really need to do much else on this. This piece looks to be pretty complete to me now. If I really wanted to, I could go, I'm going to hit 1 on my keyboard here and try and figure out why this was pinching. And you can see exactly why it's pinching is that that bevel didn't continue. So we're going to go into target weld, and I'll just bring these guys down like this and see if that helped it in any way. We'll deselect, and indeed, that corner now looks better than this corner did. So I'll do the same thing here, hit 1 on my keyboard, and I'm going to target weld to get rid of that kind of funky shape there that didn't really need to be there. In fact, I can get rid of this edge here, which that's a nice quad. It doesn't need to be there. And I can probably cut across here to keep that nice and clean. Like so. Now, this can take a while to get used to when you're doing high poly like this. Just make sure you don't get too hung up on how close you get to things, right? So remember that this thing is only a couple of centimeters across. It's a fairly small piece. And so looking at it up close like this, like I was looking at it through a micron telescope or a microscope, it's not useful. You know, no one's ever going to see it like this in game. So we just want to make sure that we're kind of getting close enough to the shape. Now there's one more edge here that looks like could be supported coming across here. Again, if I go to high poly, it goes way too far out, it rounds. And so I'm going to grab that edge. On this side, it looks pretty self-explanatory. On this side, it may cause problems. I'm going to hit 3 again. I'm going to go to my bevel again. I'm going to give it another segment. And actually, that looks pretty good. So there. I actually have now what looks like a pretty decent high poly. Now, switching between the 1, 2, and 3 keys on your keyboard are your render modes. So 1 is showing you your actual topology. 2 is going to show you your topology. That's it in the wireframe here. And then it's showing you a subdivided version of the geometry inside that. This one can be a little confusing to look at. And then 3 in the keyboard is just showing you what it's going to look like when it gets smoothed. So this is kind of the end result. Now this actually isn't high poly. It's a preview of what the high poly is going to look like. And so keep that in mind. To actually make it high poly, I'm going to get out of display mode that looks like that. I'm going to be in object mode, and I'm going to say mesh, smooth, and I'll go into the options here, and I'm going to bring the iterations up to maybe 3, like so, and I'll hit apply. And now you'll see that this thing is actually high poly. So it just gave you a preview of what the geometry was going to do when we subdivided it. And you can see that this thing looks pretty good now. There's one little issue down here. Looks like I might have wanted to cut some edges in a different place here. Let me hit undo. There we go. So in the case of this mesh, and again, this is one of the things that's different high poly to low, is it actually is in my best interest here. I'm going to go multi-cut to add some n-gons. So in the case of this mesh, I'll bring this right down to the bottom. I'm going to hide my ugly n-gons on the bottom. So I'm just going to cut this thing in a way where I'm putting those meshes underneath. And then I'll get rid of this edge. Like that. So that gave me really clean quads on here. And if we look at the difference now, mesh, smooth, you'll see that that's really nice and clean now. And again, there's no artifacting from the n-gons because you can see that they're actually just on the planar bottom of this thing. So in places where you're getting weird pinches like that, you may want to try and add a little bit more cutting to it. But that looks pretty solid. I'm pretty pleased with the way that that works. I'm going to leave that one on. I'm going to undo the smooth. Now, the reason I undo the smooth, I never save anything with the smooth on it. And the reason for that is that if you do, your Maya file is going to get really, really big because there's a ton of geometry in there. And that'll just slow down the file. And so I don't really want to do that. The files, we don't really need it to be slow at all. So let's go to the next one here. I'm going to hit 3 on these guys. We'll isolate them and we'll see what they look like. And it looks like the buttons are just fine, but the screws are not. So let me show you a different technique that you can use here. I'm going to go to edges, and inside of my modeling tools, I'm going to go to mesh tools, and I'm going to go to the crease tool. Now the way the crease tool works is you grab an edge. Okay, so I'm going to go all the way around the star here, and I'm going to middle mouse button, click, and drag. And that's going to crease that edge, making it a little bit more rigid. So I'll do the same thing here with this one. Okay. Middle mouse click and drag to the right, and it hardens it. And what this does is it gives you a much closer shape to what you might actually be after. I'm going to do these ones and this one and there. Now that looks, if I get out of here, that looks pretty decent as the high poly. So again, I'm going to select these things. I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard to go to my original view. You can see your creased edges are bold. Okay, that's what's indicating to you that you've creased them. With this mesh, I'm going to go to Mesh, Smooth. And again, just double check that it's doing exactly what I want it to. And indeed, the screws look great. And the buttons look great. So I'm going to undo the smoothing again so that I don't bloat my file. And remember that these meshes, this one and this one, I'm going to go and remove their history. They're done, right? When I want to export my high poly, I go Mesh, Smooth, Export, and then undo and get that smooth gone again. This mesh, okay, we're going to do the same thing here. I can already see that this is going to cause a problem here. There is a concave angle. This should actually be fixed on the low poly as well. I should have cut here and here. Concave angles generally don't do what they're supposed to. It's actually not concave in the front, so it looks fine in the front. So let's go again, 3. You can see that this mesh is just completely folding in on itself. So we can go and start supporting some of these edges. So I know that right down the middle needs to be rigid. And along the bottom needs to be rigid. And along the top needs to be rigid. And that's what's going to hold the shape of this thing being the Picatinny rail. So I'll hit 3 on the keyboard. We'll go to Mesh Tools again. And we'll select that crease tool again. And I'll right click and drag. I'll go down here. And I'll bring that over. We'll go across here. That's starting to hold up. Go across here. And again, I'm just middle mouse clicking, dragging to the right, and that's dragging it up to the place that it should be. I've got a corner in here, which needs to remain a corner. Like so. And again, there's something missing from the front. Like so. Okay, so that's all holding up. We'll swing around to the back. Middle mouse drag. Now, I did make this rounded at the back, so I'm just looking to see where it needs to be creased and where it does not. And that needs to be creased as well as these ones. Like so. And again, that piece looks really good now. So I'll get out of that mode. I'm going to go to Mesh Smooth. Just again to double check that I'm not getting any weirdness on it. That it's actually behaving the way that you would want it to behave. And indeed, that looks pretty solid. So I'll undo to get rid of the Mesh Smooth. I'll unhide everything. Lastly, I have my piece of glass, and I don't actually need to do anything with the piece of glass. Because I want it to be perfectly smooth, I'm going to just export it as is. In fact, it may not even need a high poly. If I were to delete that, when I do my baking, if the low poly glass doesn't see any glass, it'll just bake a flat color. And so that's actually going to be the better way of approaching this. And so there is now my high poly all done. So I'll just make sure this is all in preview mode so we can see what it's going to look like. And beautiful. It looks decent. And so I'll bring it back to its default view. And that is it. That is the high poly done for this asset. And so it's just a matter of going in. Again, I want to make sure that they're kept on separate layers here. So I've got my low poly in one, and I've got my high poly in the other. And then when I export this as FBX, which again, you're going to need for next week when we do our painting and what have you. We're going to start with UVs next week, and then we're going to get into painting. But yeah, that's all that's required with this. This asset is completely done with the exception of UVs and texturing, and is ready to go. In my low poly, I will have some cleanup. I got to go get rid of unwanted topology. I've got to get rid of wasted topology. I've got to get rid of n-gon. So if I go through here and connect and hit enter, and here, connect, and here, and here, and connect. So there, that's all nice quads through the middle. And I'll do the same thing on this side. Like so. Okay, so that got rid of that n-gon. I can see right here is another n-gon. I'm just going to cut across here. Which is going to split those into two quads. The triangulation is good here. We've got wasted topology in the center. So these vertices are being used to create curvature in the front. But they're not in the back, nor are they in the center. And so that means that they're wasted. So I'm going to go and deselect all my vertices, go to target weld, and I'll start getting rid of anything that doesn't contribute to the shape. So that can go over there. That can go over there. I might as well leave the center line. It's going to end up being used anyway over here. And I'll bring this one over here, and this one over here, and this one over here. Okay. This can come back as well. Nope, that needs to be there. It can go back here, like so. And in order to avoid that concave edge or that concave corner again, I'll put another connection in here. And it's just a matter of like getting rid of stuff that isn't used. So, you know, I've got a vertex right here. And again, if I go move it around, like that doesn't do anything to the shape of my model. So that means it's unneeded. Target weld, drag it over here. This too, it's not doing anything. Not doing anything, not doing anything. Aha, there it's adding curvature. Not doing anything, not doing anything, not doing anything, not doing anything. And I just want to get rid of these things. This is going to lower my polygon count, and it's what's going to allow me to have these really nice bevels in here that make this thing look really clean. So if you remember, we have a polygon limit for our accessories. And we need to make sure that we're paying attention to that. We go too high, and it'll cause issues. And so I want to make sure that I'm not blowing that polygon count budget by having topology that doesn't do anything. So same thing down here. I can see there's an n-gon there that I'm going to have to fix. This can go forward and forward. And every little face that you save in doing this adds to your model. I'm going to leave that one. I don't like the really long skinny angle there, but that looks okay. Yeah, I'm pleased with that. I'm pleased with that. So there's one more n-gon here I got to clean right here. And turn off the target weld. And we'll go from here to here, connect, enter, and from here to here, connect. So this style of modeling that we're doing is called hard surface modeling, obviously, because these geometry, these pieces are hard surfaced. And it's a pretty typical way of modeling. There's a lot of assets that are done this way. I'm going to go take a look here and see how clean I've gotten this thing. I'm going to go into my mesh. I'm going to go into cleanup, and I'm going to look for more than 4 sides. And, oh, not 4-sided. I want more than 4 sides. Aha. So there's one right there. So this was one that escaped my notice. This should be a fairly easy, pardon me, fairly easy cleanup. I'm just going to drag that one vertex there back here. And that should clean it up. So again, if I go to mesh, cleanup, beautiful. So it did highlight a couple of vertices here for me. Let me just make sure that there's nothing wrong with those. Nope, we're good. Okay, so that piece is really nice and clean. That low poly is good to go. So to highlight the end-gons, all I do, you just go into mesh mode. You just select your object. You're in object mode. You go to mesh, cleanup options. And in cleanup, you say faces with more than 4 sides. And I want to make sure that it selects them. It doesn't clean them because the software isn't really good at cleaning them. It'll make triangles, but it might make bad looking triangles. And so I just want to identify where they are. So I just hit apply and it'll go and select them for me. You can see here it's actually selecting non-manifold geometry. And is that really non-manifold? I think that looks fine. But yes, that is how you do that. And so that's it. That is the entire thing. You know, these guys are clean. I would want to make sure that this is clean. Again, same deal here. I'm probably better off just making sure that that's like that. And then that's it. That is the entire thing. This is ready for UVs. I may want to go through and soften all my edges. Mesh display, soften. You can see that's going to cause some problems down here. So we'll go and harden these edges back. Like so. Mesh display, harden. And then same thing here, this. Now these hardening edges, the reason, oh, there's some more end-gons there that I didn't fix. The reason that this hard and soft edge thing happens on the bottom piece here, and it doesn't happen on the top, is that I put that really nice chamfer, or that bevel, along the edge. And that helps support the edge so that it remains cleaner. The normals are much smaller there. So mesh display and harden. And there, that thing looks pretty decent. Oops. Missed a couple. This and that. But yeah, that's the idea, is that get it as nice and clean as you can to let the normals from the normal map take over, and then this is ready to go. So I would go and say File, Save As, and let this sucker go. And then there's a barrel attachment that needs to be made as well. And so creating, I mean, right along the same lines, you know, going and creating a muzzle. That's not spelling. Muzzle brake, and going to find a really nice muzzle brake that would look good on a pistol. You know, finding something that you like the look of, and something that you think is decent. There's some really cool looking shapes here that again, you know, depending on your level of confidence with the software and how well or how easily you find this stuff, you know, there's all varying levels of degrees of complexity that you can find in these things. And so I will leave it up to you to choose what kind of barrel attachment you want on your pistola, and then that's it. And once the geometry is all done, next week we're going to be doing UVs, and we're going to be doing texturing.